In this video, I'll be sharing how to create this window, which was a question that I got asked because last time I shared how to create a window on a wall, it was just a rectangular one, and they wanted to know how to create this arched window parametrically. So that's what I'm going over here. I'll create the overall form on a wall, then inner frame, another frame here to hold the glass, and then we have our glass. At the end, we create the window surrounds using Graph Mapper. So a lot of those details we have here. Let me show you what we're doing. So here we have the wall depth. We have the overall window size. We have the height. With this one, the proportions of that arc. Here we have frame offset, frame offset. Then here we have the offset for this round. Now we also have the additional points that we can create for the graph mapper for the quality. And then at the end, we have the thickness of our frame and all of those details to turn those into solids. So we'll be going over all of those details here. Let me know if you have any questions, and let's go ahead and get started. To start, the first thing we're going to do is bring in a point. So we'll go to construct point. Construct point. Now we'll take this and we'll plug that into a point component. Then I'll bring in a Y or X Z plane. And to create that overall wall, we'll use here something called plane surface. We can use this plane to use as a reference plane for the plane here and give it a size. So I'll say 120 by 120. The reason why I'm using inches, and this would be a 10-foot by 10-foot wall, but the reason why I use inches is because the window is actually going to be used, it's going to be dimensioned, and typically we use inches, right? We won't use like half a foot. So now with 120 here, we can extrude this to give it a thickness. So we'll go to extrude surface or extrude, and we can extrude this plane in the positive Y direction. So go here to unit Y, and we'll give this the thickness of the wall. So I'll say 8.00. I'll label these. Next thing is we'll take this, and now we need to create the overall window. Now it could be any form, but the question that I got asked was about the arched windows. So that's what I'll be creating. And anytime we create an object, we're going to start with a point or a reference point. So for this one, we want to start maybe with the center point, and from there we can kind of move it around. And so let's get started doing that. Let's go to this plane and let's select a point relative to this plane. A lot of times I use the MD slider because this lets me kind of pick one fairly quickly, but it's tricky to get accurate with this. So I tend to use something different called construct point, which is very similar to what we do here. But with this one, we're going to construct a point on this surface. And so we'll go here to 0.5 in the X and Y. And this is what we'll combine with evaluate surface. which means that we're going to take the surface and we are going to extract a point on that surface, and that point is going to be in the X and Y. Now this plane is actually 120 by 120, so if I were to just say 0.5, it's going to do 0.5 here. But as long as we take the surface and we reparameterize it, we're able to now turn this from 0 to 1. Even though this is 120, it'll say this is 0 to 1, and now this will place it at the 0.5 location. And also remember that the reference plane we're using is this X and Y. So if we move this in the, I'll copy to here. If we move this in the X, it'll move this way. And if we move it in the Y, it'll move up and down. So with this being said, we can take now that point in that reference frame, and let's now create the window. So to create this window, let's first take this point and we're going to move it to each direction by a specific amount, and that's going to give us the width of the window. So we'll take this and we'll go to move. Now we'll take this move and we'll move the point. In which direction? Well, we can use this plane as a reference plane, or we can just move it in the positive X and negative X. I'll bring this down here and we'll go positive and negative using, let's say 24. Positive. And then I'll create a new copy here and then bring in a negative. What happens is when we do 24 to one side and 24 to the other, or 30 to this side, and so that's going to be overall 60. So this means that if we take this and we divide it by 2, this will give us the overall width of our window. So we can take this and change the size here to window size. Now that we have the window size, we can go, we have these 2 points. Now we're going to take these 2 points and move them up. We'll go here to move. Motion is going to be Z, and it's going to be positive. It's going to be up. And we'll give it a height, so we'll say 60. So as you can see, it kind of brings it all the way up to here. So this is where we can come here to our Y coordinate and kind of bring it down a little bit. Or we can also bring this down just a bit. Now what we need to do is create the arc here. There are different arcs that we can create. So let's start with kind of like the most basic one. Or the one that I would use would be between these 2 points, we're going to create a line. And in that line, we're going to extract the midpoint. We'll disable the preview on that line. Now we can take that point and move it vertically. By using a slider. I'll copy the slider over. Now we can disable the preview on this and call this window height. Arch height. The reason why that's the arch height is because when we bring in the arch 3 points, the arc 3 points will go 1, 2, and 3. So we'll start with the first one, point A, this one, point B, and then the last one, point C. Now you can put them in a different order, but that in general gives you that idea. Here's the thing. If you have the overall width divided by 2, you get a perfect arch. So if we have the window height or the width, the window size 30, if we were to take that and do divide by 2, that would give us the perfect one. Why? Because we can change the size and it will always keep the proportions of the arc that goes all the way up. Now you can do this divided not by 2, but divided by 3. So maybe that's one way that you can kind of work the proportions. But I think actually this is the best way to create. There are other ones, like if you were to go to arc, like this one, but this one, it's going to ask for the center point. And so we would actually go here and use half. We would go to our overall width, this one. So I guess you see that there are different ways of doing it. And I think there's another one called arc seed, which means that using a direction, but then you need other things that we don't have here. So the reason why I like the 3 points is because we do have a point here, we have a point here, so we know that that's the start and end point, and all we need to do is create that midpoint, which is easy just for me to extract a center point and move up. So that's would be my suggestion. So now let's go around here and join these. So go to a polyline, and I'll start here and make my way around. So hold down shift and add more inputs. So that's incorrect. So let me show you why I did incorrectly here. I want to start here and work my way around. So I actually want to start here and go here, this one. So now you see that we have with this polyline and this one that we can join them together. So let's go here to join. So with this, we can now hide the original surface, and we're going to take this and extrude it the thickness of the wall and subtract it or extrude it with the surface. So we'll take this arc and we'll actually, I was thinking something different, which would be to create a boundary surfaces between the plane, which we can extract the outer curve of that plane by just bringing in this curve component. And now we can use this and the arc. I'll plug this in here, walk myself over here, and then hold down shift and add this one and flatten the input to make sure that we get that surface. Now we can take this and rather than extrude it all the way over here, I just bring it over and use the surface to extrude instead, which means that we actually create that base form. And now we can bring this back Now we can think about working on the overall form. So now that we've created the opening, we can create a few details that will kind of create like this fixed window. And from there would be some other details that we can do here on the outside. So first thing I'll do is I'll take this curve and I'll offset it. As it's offsetting to the outside, I'll bring in a negative component and offset it by, let's say something like 1.5. And then we'll do the same thing again by copying this, by plugging this as the input. So now we have two offsets. One, then I'll create a surface between these two and then another surface between these two. So go to boundary surfaces between these and then one between these. Now it's not going to work until we flatten the input, because then it'll look at it now as one flatten. And so now we've created kind of the outer frame, the inner frame, and then in between, obviously there's going to be glass. So we'll take this last one. What I want to do is move all of this to the exact center of the wall and then extrude it from the center. That will just make it a lot easier, because we technically for the most part want to center things on the wall, but we can always change that. So we'll take these and we'll move them in the negative or in the positive Y, but we'll take the wall thickness or the wall depth divided by 2, and we can even use the vector. Now we can use that as our move. And so we can take this, once you have it plugged in to 1, then we can just copy this 2 more times and plug other ones, which means we'll actually just move all of those to that same center location. And if we change any of those sizes here, say like the wall depth, you'll see that it remains in the center. So now we'll take one of these and we'll extrude it and give it a thickness, and we'll do the same thing to the rest. So you'll see that that's a theme that I use all the time, is once you have one set of steps, you can kind of copy them over. So let's take this and go to another move, this time in the positive Y, and extrude. So once I move it by half, then I can extrude it by that same one that I moved. I'm going to extrude in the negative direction by twice as much. So unit Y times 2, so you are multiplying a vector times 2, and then turning that vector the opposite direction, which gives us a center extrusion overall with one overall form as a result. If you're confused by that, give it a shot and just practice it, and trust me, it'll kind of click in, and it's something that it's actually fairly useful for a lot of things. So once we have this, then we can use our same one here, basically all of this, copy it down here. So that's going to be for frame 1. This one. Will be plug both of these in. Give me 1 second because I think so we have this one that goes into this one, and it extrudes it. We'll do that again with this one. This is going to be smaller. Yeah, that works. So this is going to be frame 1. Going to be frame 2. This will be glass. So here I'll do 0.5. All right, I feel like that looks pretty good. Now let's create, so one thing that pops into my head is we have these extrusions, right? And when we do this extrusion, that's 1.7, but that's times 2. So we're doing it to each side by this much. So we technically have to take this and divide it by 2 for it to be the overall size. So I'm just kind of doing that for these. And it's something that I could have done before I copied them. That's okay. The reason why is because this frame, if it's 10 here, it would also be 10 here. So we can actually take the wall depth, not depth. Actually, it is the depth. We'll take this and bring it over here. And we don't necessarily have to use a frame size now. You can just use the wall size. I'm showing you a few different options. Obviously, we can come here and go here to like 9 and make it a little bit smaller. But I'll actually bring this back. I'll leave the relay here, unplug the relay, plug this one in, and maybe even leave a little note here. So I'll do quotation marks, and this would be match wall size relay. When you do quotation marks, it lets you write, and then it'll bring in a panel, and I can just, it actually brings it in a small size, so it's really cool. And then we can just put it here next to this one in case we want to change it and match it to the wall size. Now let's create the outer portion, which would be called the window surrounds. I have something in mind. We can kind of create a straightforward one, but I want to do something a little bit different. So I'll come here to our base curve, which is this one. Now we're going to offset it to the outside. So we'll take this and we'll go to offset. And remember how every time we offset it, it actually offsets it to the outside? Well, that's good in this case. We can actually take advantage of that. And now we have this and these two. With surrounds, it's pretty interesting because we can technically just extrude this and make it one thickness, or we can extract. Let's try this. So I'm not guaranteeing anything with this one actually. We can just extrude it, but let's try this one out. So we'll get the endpoint. And we'll copy this and we'll get the endpoint of this one. Now between those two, I'll create a line. From start point to the other point. And I'll take this and I will create some divisions. We'll say 5 divisions. And then these points we are going to move relative to the negative y in a specific shape. So we'll take these and we'll move them. Now that we have this moved, we're going to use a graph mapper. So what we'll do is we're going to move it in the y direction because we see here this is positive y, we want negative y. Now to create and use a graph mapper, there are 2 things that we're going to need. The direction we want to move it. Now we want the graph mapper, which will allow us to use a graph to create a curve. So we'll take this, right click, graph types, and we'll go to a sign and we'll plug this in. Next is we need to create some domains. So we'll go create a range and create a range of numbers here, which will allow us to then plug that into our graph mapper and change those values using the graph. So we'll use the 5 count of the number of subdivisions we created for those points. We'll put that into the steps. Then we'll plug the range into the graph mapper. And now we can use this negative value and plug that into the motion. Now we can move this graph and you can see we have 5 subdivisions. So it has 5 here. And we want to move this to the center to kind of create this sine shape. And we can also increase the size of it. Now what I'll do here is with these points, I'll go to a interpolate, and that will give us a curve that will go through all of those points. I'll disable the preview, and now I'll take this and I'll actually move it again in the y direction. We'll go to move. I'll copy y negative, and then here I'll go to 1.5. So now we've moved it over by that much. We can disable the preview on this. And we still have this base curve, which we can now extract the endpoints of both this one and join it together. So we already have the endpoints, the start and end point on this one. So I'll just create the endpoint on this one, which technically we have here, but it's better just to extract it here. Now we can create a line between the start this one. So they're switched. So I'll do this one. Then I'll copy it over. And I know that this one went to the top one, so now this one goes to the top one. And this one goes into the endpoint. Now we can join those together. So let's go to join curves and plug all of those into input for that. And lastly, bring in this curve. Now we'll take this one and our original curve, and we'll type in sweep 2. So sweep 2.2 curves, 2 rails. We'll use this rail, and plug in our section, which is our overall section here. So now the cool thing is with our graph mapper, we can now play around with some of the details here. And since we have the glass here, if I'm not mistaken, our center plane for the glass, this will actually become our mirror plane. For our overall surround. And using Graph Mapper, we can play around with some of these values, including how far out it comes out. And you can plug in more than one at a time. So we'll go here to okay, so let's bring in another graph mapper. And we can actually plug in more than one. So let's go here to a Bezier, which allows us to actually use some of these points. We can further play with it. You can add additional factors here, where you can skip it completely. Just go straight into a different one. And this one lets you pick some control points like this. But I do feel like the sine one gives me a better result. I'll just leave both of them here. Do something like that. And from here, of course, we can take all of this together and create an array along this way and create a big wall with parametric windows. So overall, that gives you an idea of how to create a window, how to add details to a window. With this one, we can change the size, like all of this is fully parametric. Location, size, depth of wall. Let's see if we can change the window size, window height. So the more points you add, creates more a finer detail, I guess I would say, on here, and it gives you more steps to work within. Maybe that's something else to share with you guys. And then here, glass, and all of the stuff. I'm just going over the script to see if I missed anything. And no, so that looks pretty good. I will have this available. Let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully that was interesting and useful. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to get a hold of the script that I created for this video, check out my website capettidavid.com. There you can become a Script Vault member where you can access all of the video scripts that I've created for my YouTube. You can access also the script store where I have optimized scripts. And lastly, if you want to learn Grasshopper and you've never tried it, or you want to share that with someone, I have a 6-module course that will help anyone get started. I post videos like this that will teach people how to get started using Grasshopper, so make sure to subscribe for future content. I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you next time.